Forget what you've been told about paradise. The ocean does not keep treasures. It swallows them. It doesn't build shining cities of crystal towers or whisper utopian promises through seashells. It takes. It drowns. It buries. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, it lets something slip back up, just enough to keep you wondering. You're standing at the edge of the shore, waves licking your ankles. They're cold. Too cold. The horizon stretches in a line that looks endless, like it's daring you to follow it. And you might if you were gullible enough. Somewhere beyond that line, people once swore lay Atlantis, the city of philosophers, inventors, god-kings. The one that was better than everyone else, until, of course, it wasn't. Now, here's the spoiler, you're never going to find it. Not Atlantis, not Lemuria, not any other mythical continent. What you will find is the reason humans keep making these stories up. You'll find our obsession with what we've lost, or what we're afraid of losing. You'll find ruins, yes, but most of them belong to people who lived, struggled, and collapsed in ways far less glamorous than the bedtime stories tell. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, the ocean. It isn't your friend. It never was. If you've ever tasted seawater, you know it burns like it wants you gone. Every drowned city, every toppled temple, every whisper of a forgotten people, this is where they go. You want to know about Atlantis? You'll have to step in. And by step in, I mean close your eyes, let the sand slip out from under your feet, and imagine the water pulling you down. It's quiet here. Too quiet. No gulls, no waves. Just pressure building in your chest, ribs aching, lungs begging. But this is how the stories begin. Not with golden crowns or spaceships powered by crystals. They begin with drowning. With disaster. With the kind of silence only the deep knows how to keep. And it only gets worse. Picture this, a great city. Wide avenues lined with marble columns. Markets full of fruits you don't have names for. Scholars scribbling notes on clay, debating the nature of the soul while ignoring the sewage running under their feet. People always picture Atlantis as perfect. They never picture the smell. Or the rats. Or the fact that half the population probably had back pain from hauling blocks of stone big enough to crush a cottage. Congrats, you're in paradise. Of course, the legend doesn't say much about the plumbing. Plato, our main source, wasn't really trying to give you a tourist guide. He was lecturing about arrogance and decline. Atlantis wasn't supposed to be real, it was supposed to be a warning. A bedtime story for grown men in togas who thought they were untouchable. But somewhere along the way, people decided, actually, this sounds fun. Let's believe it. And so here you are, wandering the shoreline centuries later, wondering if somewhere under your toes there's a staircase to a drowned library. You imagine pulling up treasures, bronze helmets, cracked amphory, maybe even a glowing crystal or two. Don't get excited. Most underwater ruins turn out to be rocks shaped a little too neatly. Nature has a sense of humor, apparently. Still, you want to believe. Everyone does. Because it's easier to believe in an advanced civilization that vanished overnight than to admit civilizations are fragile and boring in their collapse. No single cataclysm. Just food shortages, disease, debt, and stubborn leaders ignoring the warning signs. Sound familiar? Exactly that. But this is only the start. Atlantis is just one name on a long list. Lemuria. Kamarikan. Whole continents people swear existed but no one can quite find. Some were dreamed up to explain strange fossils. Others were pulled out of thin air to make the maps look symmetrical. None of them sit on Google Earth, no matter how much you zoom. So, tonight, as you stand on this shore, staring into the black horizon, remember, the ocean isn't hiding your paradise. It's hiding your mistakes. Your hubris. Your ancestors' hubris. Lost civilizations aren't fairy tales, they're mirrors. And you're about to take a long look. Now take a deep breath. We're going under. You wake up in a city that shouldn't exist. The streets are wide, unnaturally straight. The buildings gleam with polished stone, their edges too sharp, too perfect. There are canals everywhere. Because apparently even imaginary civilizations had better public works than half of today's cities. But before you get too comfortable, remember this. None of it is real. Atlantis is a story, not a travel brochure, not a missing chapter in history. Just a cautionary tale dreamed up by a cranky philosopher named Plato. Let's rewind. It's the 4th century BCE. Athens has survived war after war, and people are sitting around wondering what it all meant. Plato, in his endless lectures, decides to slip in a story. He writes that, long ago, there was a powerful island kingdom beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. They were wealthy, advanced, smug. Naturally, they picked a fight with Athens. And naturally they lost. Then, because divine punishment always sells better than a boring ending, the gods sank them beneath the sea. That's it. That's the myth. One paragraph. One warning shot at the kind of arrogance Athenians should probably avoid. And somehow, it spiraled into centuries of speculation, expeditions, and conspiracy theories. The real point wasn't Atlantis itself. It was the moral. Too much power, too much pride, and you collapse. Maybe not overnight, maybe not in a glorious tidal wave, but collapse all the same. Plato wasn't whispering about secret blueprints or ancient energy grids. He was holding up a mirror to his audience, smirking and saying, "This could be you." Congrats, Plato. 2,000 years later, people are still ignoring you. Here's the funny part. Every generation since has tried to claim Atlantis as theirs. The Victorians? They thought it explained fossils and missing land bridges. The Theosophists? They imagined Atlanteans as spiritually advanced super beings. Modern conspiracy circles? They picture UFO launch pads and crystal batteries humming under the sea. Plato would probably laugh, or maybe cry, if he saw the mess. And let's be honest, his version wasn't exactly glamorous. The Atlanteans weren't benevolent teachers of humanity. They were the bad guys. Corrupt, greedy, warmongering. Athens, in this story, are the scrappy underdogs who win by virtue and reason. In short, Plato gave us an allegory about hubris. We turned it into an episode of Ancient Aliens. Still, you can't help but picture it, can you? A shining metropolis swallowed whole, its towers dissolving into coral, its avenues patrolled by schools of fish. The human brain loves that kind of imagery. Catastrophe is neat. Collapse is cinematic. Real history? It's slow, drawn out, and mostly about crop failures. Nobody makes blockbusters about barley shortages. So, we keep circling back to Atlantis. It's the story that lets us imagine perfection, while secretly enjoying its destruction. If it was real, then maybe we've lost more than we'll ever know. And if it wasn't, well, we've at least inherited a good bedtime story. You, meanwhile, are still wandering those 2 straight streets. You hear the echo of sandals slapping against marble. You smell the salt of the sea, sharp and invasive, as if it's already planning the city's funeral. And overhead, the sky glows unnaturally bright, like the gods are watching, waiting for their cue. Spoiler alert, it's not going to end well. But before we drown this city for the first of many times, let's remember the key detail. Plato wasn't trying to hide a mystery. He was writing philosophy, not history. He named no exact coordinates. He gave no map. He dropped a parable in your lap and assumed you'd get the hint. Don't be arrogant. Don't think yourself immune. Don't imagine your civilization can't sink. And yet, we couldn't leave it alone. Atlantis is the myth we refuse to stop digging for. Maybe because we're always looking for proof we were once greater than we are. Maybe because it's easier to believe in drowned utopias than to accept that collapse is ordinary, inevitable, and painfully human. So, the waves keep whispering. The horizon keeps luring. And every century or so, someone swears they found it. In the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, under Antarctic ice. Each time, the evidence slips away, like sand between your fingers. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Atlantis may be the loudest legend, but it isn't the only one. The sea has other ghosts. And they're waiting. You wake up to the sound of water. Not the peaceful kind, like a babbling brook, but the relentless slap of canals against stone walls. It seeps into everything. The smell, the air, the fabric of your bedding. You roll over and congratulations, you're damp again. Welcome to Atlantis, the city everyone loves to imagine, but no one bothers to describe realistically. The bed? It's hard. Wood and straw. Don't even think about memory foam. The floor is cool beneath your feet, polished marble, because apparently marble was everywhere. Architects here seem to have believed that if you can't blind visitors with your brilliance, you should at least blind them with reflected sunlight. You step outside. The air hits you, salty, heavy, hot. Forget air conditioning. Forget even shade. These wide boulevards were designed for parades, not comfort. Your eyes squint against the glare of sun bouncing off white stone. Somewhere nearby, merchants shout about figs, fish, and whatever passes for a bargain. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Atlantis is busy, louder than you expect. Smiths hammering bronze. Farmers bringing in baskets of olives. Priests chanting in shrines. And of course, the endless gossip of neighbors, because even in a mythical supercivilization, people still care more about who's sleeping with whom than about philosophy. The smell? A charming cocktail of roasted meat, human sweat, and sewage. Yes, sewage. Remember those canals? Beautiful in paintings. Less so when you realize they double as the city's plumbing. You wrinkle your nose, but it doesn't help. There's no escaping it. This is civilization, ancient style. Still, you try to be impressed. The temples are massive, carved with images of gods you don't recognize. The statues loom, perfectly symmetrical, a little too smug. Everything about Atlantis screams excess. Columns thicker than necessary. Gold worked into jewelry that no farmer could ever afford. Public squares designed to make you feel small. And maybe that's the point. This city runs on pride. Every brick tells you, we are better than you. Richer, smarter, stronger. You get the sense the gods are watching and enjoying the irony. Now, let's talk about food. You chew on a piece of bread so dense it could double as a building material. Fish is everywhere, salted, grilled, stewed. If you don't like fish, too bad. The wine helps, though it tastes suspiciously like vinegar with ambition. Still you drink. It's safer than the water, and besides, everyone else is doing it. You notice something else, layers. Atlantis isn't one city, it's rings of them, concentric circles of land and sea. You cross a bridge and suddenly you're in another district, richer, shinier, more exclusive. Each ring separates the powerful from the powerless. By the time you reach the center, the air practically reeks of privilege. Priests in spotless robes. Nobles dripping in jewels. Soldiers polished like statues. It's dazzling, yes, but suffocating too. You wonder what happens if you don't belong here. Where do the workers live? The ones hauling stones, cleaning canals, scrubbing the nobles' sandals? Probably in the outer rings, where the houses sag, the fish smells stronger, and the marble gives way to plain mud brick. Funny how legends rarely mention that. But maybe you shouldn't think too hard. You're here to marvel. And marvel you do, even as sweat runs down your back and your sandals rub blisters into your heels. For a moment, you almost believe the stories, that this city really was the crown jewel of the ancient world, too perfect to last. Then you hear it. A rumble. Subtle at first, almost like distant thunder. The ground shifts under your toes. People pause mid-conversation, eyes darting toward the sea. You feel your stomach drop. You know what's coming even if they don't. The city won't be here forever. You breathe in the hot, salty air, watching sunlight shimmer on the water that both sustains and threatens this place. Atlantis lives like it will never end. And that, of course, is exactly why it will. So, enjoy your day. Eat the bread, drink the sour wine, walk the marble streets. Because tomorrow, or next year, or maybe a century from now, it all goes under. And the waves don't leave souvenirs. You open your eyes, expecting waves, expecting marble ruins, but instead you're surrounded by jungle. Thick, damp, leaf. Vines curl over broken stone. Parrots shriek above your head, and somewhere in the distance, something growls. You don't know what continent you're on, because technically, it doesn't exist. Welcome to Lemuria, humanity's favorite missing continent. The story starts not with prophets or philosophers but with scientists. Yes, science. The kind with beards and maps, scratching their heads in the 19th century. They were puzzled. How could fossils of the same ancient lemurs show up in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East? Clearly, they thought, there must have once been a land bridge. A great continent connecting Madagascar, India, maybe even Australia. A continent that later sank beneath the waves. And thus, Lemuria was born. Spoiler alert, it was bad geology. Plate tectonics wasn't a thing yet. People hadn't figured out that continents move like drunk icebergs. Instead, they just invented a continent to make the fossils line up. Science at its finest. But the idea stuck. Because humans love filling in blanks with grand lost worlds. A boring land bridge? That's practical. But a massive continent full of forgotten civilizations? That's irresistible. Soon, Lemuria wasn't just about lemurs. It was about lost wisdom, vanished people, and sometimes, mystical powers. Congrats, your imaginary passport just got stamped. Let's take a walk. The air here is heavy, humid. Every breath tastes like green leaves and wet soil. The ground squelches under your feet. And in your mind's eye, you start to imagine the people who supposedly lived here. Tall, spiritual, enlightened, because of course they were. Myths rarely picture ancient people as just people. No one wants to imagine farmers cursing at stubborn goats. They want glowing sages meditating under waterfalls. By the late 1800s, Lemuria had been hijacked by mystics. Madame Blavatsky, the queen of spiritual recycling, declared that Lemuria was home to one of the root races of humanity. Giants. Egglayers. Psychic beings. Depending on who you asked, they were either noble teachers of wisdom or cautionary tales of degeneration. Either way, far more exciting than fossils. Meanwhile, in Tamil Nadu, India, people told stories of Kumari Kandam, a legendary sunken land of their own. Entire kingdoms swept away by the sea. Ancient texts hinted at it, and colonial scholars eager to prove their pet theories about Lemuria latched on. Soon, two very different traditions, European pseudoscience and South Indian legend, got woven together like vines wrapping around ruins. And you, sweating in this imaginary jungle, get the full effect. You hear drums in the distance. You picture great stone temples rising above the canopy, steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. You imagine scholars writing on palm leaves, poets reciting verses, farmers coaxing rice from flooded fields. And then, you imagine the flood. Waters rising, swallowing the land, turning civilization into myth. The funny thing? Lemuria never existed. It was erased by science as soon as plate tectonics came along. But the legend refused to drown. Even today, you'll find books about Lemurian wisdom, crystal healers claiming to channel its energy, YouTubers whispering about portals in Mount Shasta. Once a continent enters the imagination, it doesn't leave. So here you are, ankle-deep in mud, staring at ruins that were never here, listening to echoes of civilizations that never lived. Because we need them. Lemuria is a blank canvas, a continent-shaped hole we fill with our hopes, fears, and nostalgia for golden ages that probably weren't golden at all. And just when you think you've shaken off the vines and humidity, the jungle parts, and you see it, the ocean again. Always the ocean. Waiting, patient, smug. Whether it's Atlantis, Lemuria, or Kumari Kandam, the water is always there, ready to swallow your imagination whole. So breathe in the damp air, wipe the sweat from your brow, and step forward. There are more continents waiting, and none of them are on the map. You wake up surrounded by endless blue. No jungle this time. No marble temples. Just ocean. It stretches in every direction, calm enough to look innocent but deep enough to hide anything. You're drifting, clinging to a wooden raft when someone whispers, "Mu." No, not the sound a cow makes. Mu, as in yet another vanished continent. Atlantis had the Mediterranean. Lemuria had the Indian Ocean. And Mu? Mu claimed the Pacific, the biggest stage of them all. The name first slipped out in the 19th century, courtesy of a man named Augustus Luplongeon. He was digging around Mayan ruins in Yucatan, squinting at inscriptions he didn't really understand, and decided he'd cracked the code of the entire human race. According to him, these symbols spoke of an ancient continent called Mu. This lost world had been the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of mankind. Naturally, it sank into the Pacific, leaving only traces behind. Spoiler, his translations were wrong. Like, completely wrong. But once an idea like sunken paradise hits the air, it grows legs. Or in this case, fins. So now you're drifting in the Pacific, imagining Mu. Islands linked by bridges, palaces rising out of turquoise water, sages with flowing robes handing down cosmic wisdom. And when it all went wrong, cue the floods, the earthquakes, the usual end-of-the-world package. Because apparently, no lost civilization ever dies quietly. The air is hot. The sun beats down, merciless. Your lips crack from the salt. You squint at the horizon and almost convince yourself you see it. A city shimmering just under the waves, towers of coral and stone, beckoning. But it's a mirage. The Pacific does that. It's too big, too empty, too tempting. The legend of Mu spread quickly. Writers like James Churchward added extra chapters, claiming Mu was not only real but also the root of every civilization on Earth. Egyptians? Descendants of Mu. Mayans? Basically, if you had pyramids, you were in the club. Mu was humanity's origin story, the ultimate one-size-fits-all myth. And it only got wilder. According to some versions, Mu wasn't just advanced. It was practically a cosmic superpower. Think flying machines, psychic technologies, spiritual mastery. Everything you've ever wanted but know deep down you'll never have. Mu had it first. Then it vanished, like the ultimate humble brag. Of course, the Pacific Islands already had their own myths, about floods, migrations, gods shaping land out of water. Stories passed down through chants, carvings, and genealogies. But Mu wasn't one of them. Mu was an outsider's invention, dropped onto the Pacific like a postcard someone forgot to send. Still, it blended in, tangled up with real traditions until the line blurred. You, meanwhile, are still adrift, staring at the water. You think about Easter Island, about giant stone heads gazing inland as if waiting for something that never returned. You think about Polynesian navigators, steering canoes across thousands of miles with no maps, no compasses, just stars and memory. If that isn't advanced civilization, what is? But no, people preferred to believe in Mu, because apparently real achievement is never enough unless it comes with a tragic Atlantis-style drowning. The raft creaks. Your throat is parched. The horizon wavers. You realize something cruel. Mu's power was never in being real. Its power was in being missing. A blank page is always more exciting than one already filled in. So Mu stays lost. No ruins to dig, no fossils to prove it, no monuments rising from the waves. Just stories, stitched together from bad translations, wishful thinking, and the human refusal to accept that sometimes, we just don't know. The sun sinks lower. The sky blushes pink, then bruises purple. Night comes fast at sea, and with it, silence. You're left floating, listening to the dark ocean breathe beneath you, and wondering, if Mu never existed, why does it feel like you've just left it behind? You wake up on a coastline where the land seems too narrow for the stories it carries. The air is thick with salt and spice. Palms sway above you, and waves crawl lazily over the sand, whispering in a language older than anything you know. Somewhere beyond that horizon, people say, an entire civilization once stretched out, vast, brilliant, and gone. They called it Kumari Kandam. Unlike Atlantis or Mu, this isn't a bedtime story made up by outsiders. This one comes from deep within Tamil tradition. Ancient texts, the Sangam literature, hint at great kingdoms, cities, and landscapes swallowed by the sea. Poets wrote of lands where rivers flowed, where kings ruled, where culture thrived. And then disaster. The ocean rose and erased it all. The legend goes like this. Once, there was a massive stretch of land south of India. It was the heartland of Tamil civilization, where poets gathered, where gods walked among mortals, where dynasties built something worth remembering. Floods came, waves thundered, and one day, gone. All that was left were fragments, scattered islands, and whispers. You step into the heat of the coastal plain. The earth smells of rain and dust. The people here tell the story not as myth but as memory. For them, Kumari Kandam isn't an allegory. It's history, drowned. A homeland they believe was once real, stolen by the ocean. It's almost too neat, isn't it? A culture with one of the world's oldest living languages, claiming a lost golden age now buried. And while Westerners were spinning tales of Lemuria to explain lemur fossils, Tamil scholars were pointing to Kumari Kandam and saying, actually, we already told you a continent was here. Two different worlds of thought, colliding in the same salty water. Congrats, you've discovered a paradox. The difference is, Kumari Kandam isn't just about geography. It's about identity. For many Tamils, it's proof that their culture is older, deeper, more resilient than outsiders ever admitted. When colonial scholars dismissed local histories as myth, Kumari Kandam stood as a defiant reminder. The ocean may have taken the land, but it didn't take the memory. You walk along the beach. Fishermen pull in nets, their boats rocking like specks against the waves. Children run barefoot, shrieking, chasing each other across sand still damp from the tide. And in the back of your mind, you hear it again. The sea is patient. It erases slowly, but it erases well. Modern science, of course, doesn't back the idea of a whole sunken continent here. Plate tectonics doesn't allow it. Landmasses don't just slide under the sea like stage curtains. But archaeology has found traces, ancient ruins off the coast, submerged structures, hints of settlements swallowed by rising waters thousands of years ago. Not continents, but pieces. Enough to make you wonder. Enough to blur the line between fact and faith. Because here's the thing. While Atlantis and Mu were born from outsiders' imaginations, Kumari Kandam is a story people hold as part of themselves. It isn't a fun what if. It's an anchor. Maybe not in stone, but in spirit. You crouch at the shoreline, letting the water lap over your toes. It's warm, deceptively gentle. You imagine those poets of old, standing where you are, composing verses about lands already lost in their own time. You wonder how much was invention, how much was longing, how much was history slowly rewritten by waves. And as always, the sea doesn't answer. It never does. So, was Kumari Kandam real? The scientific answer, no, not as a continent. The cultural answer, yes, as memory. And maybe that's enough. Not all lost civilizations live in stone. Some live in the way people refuse to forget them, no matter how many times the tide comes in. You wake up underground. Or at least that's what it feels like. The air is damp, stale, heavy. You open your eyes and instead of sky, there's stone arching over your head like the ribs of some massive beast. Your first thought, cave. Your second thought, prison. Your third, wait, what if the cave is the world and everything I thought was outside is the lie? Welcome to Hollow Earth. Humanity's favorite backup plan for lost civilizations. The idea is simple enough. What if the Earth isn't solid? What if, beneath our feet, there's an entire world? Caverns big enough to hold oceans, forests, even whole civilizations we've somehow missed. Sound absurd? That's why it's lasted so long. The roots go back centuries. Some early thinkers, desperate to explain volcanoes, earthquakes, or just the general strangeness of nature, suggested that maybe the Earth was layered like an onion. Maybe it had hollow chambers inside. Some even imagined giant suns glowing at the center, keeping things nice and cozy. Who needs daylight when you've got a miniature star in your basement? Congrats, you've just invented real estate nobody can foreclose on. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the theory picked up steam. Edmund Halley, yes, the comic guy, suggested the Earth might be made of nested shells. Later, fringe thinkers took the idea further. Maybe entire civilizations lived down there. Maybe the people who built Atlantis or Lemuria didn't drown, they just moved inside. Think of it like humanity's version of cleaning up the living room before guests arrive. Oh, don't worry, the advanced race didn't disappear, they're just hiding under the floorboards. You shuffle forward, hearing your footsteps echo through tunnels. The ground vibrates with the deep groans of the earth itself. Somewhere, dripping water ticks like a clock. If you squint, you imagine cities down here, Crystal palaces glowing in the dark, canals carved by hands that never saw the sun, libraries filled with knowledge too fragile for the surface. Spoiler alert, it's not real. Still, the stories persist. In the 19th century, writers spun tales of hidden entrances at the poles. Adventurers swore they'd seen openings to a lush inner world. And by the time pulp fiction and conspiracy theories got involved, Hollow Earth wasn't just a curiosity, it was a playground. Nazis supposedly went looking for it. Mystics claimed inner Earth beings whispered secret wisdom. Science fiction turned it into whole novels. You name it, Hollow Earth had it. And let's be honest, it's kind of tempting. The surface world is messy, crowded, loud. The idea of a hidden sanctuary beneath us, untouched and perfect, is seductive. Too bad physics says no. Gravity doesn't work like that. Tectonic plates don't leave room for hidden paradises. And if there were a glowing sun inside, we'd all be cooked like rotisserie chickens. But logic has never stopped a good myth. Hollow Earth fills the same role as Atlantis or Mu, a stage where we can imagine everything we've lost, or everything we wish we could be. Advanced civilizations, pure wisdom, forgotten technologies. The only difference is location. Instead of being across the ocean, it's right under your feet. You run your hand along the damp stone wall. It's like cold. You hear the rush of something, water, maybe, or air moving in ways you don't understand. For a second, your chest tightens. Maybe there really is something down here. Maybe the myths are shadows of a truth buried too deep for us to see. Or maybe it's just the human brain, desperate to fill the darkness with meaning. The tunnel bends. The darkness thickens. And in that silence, you realize, the Hollow Earth isn't really about geography. It's about longing. For escape. For sanctuary. For the comfort of believing someone, somewhere, has it figured out. Then the ground shudders. Dust rains down. The earth groans again, louder this time, like it's laughing. And you remember the obvious, you're standing on rock, not fantasy. Civilization isn't hiding under your feet. It's right here, fragile and noisy, waiting for its own collapse. You wake up coughing water out of your lungs. Seems like every civilization humanity dreams up ends the same way. Drowned. Maybe the gods are lazy scriptwriters, or maybe humans just have a deep obsession with floods. Either way, you're floating in the aftermath of yet another deluge. Welcome to the global tradition of flood myths. The first thing you notice is the silence. Villages gone. Fields flattened. Animals bobbing in the water like forgotten toys. The air smells of mud and decay. And in the middle of this mess, you realize, almost every culture on Earth has told this story. In Mesopotamia, it was Utnapishtim, building a boat to save himself from a flood sent by grumpy gods. In the Bible, Noah does the same thing, trading Mesopotamian reeds for a wooden ark big enough to embarrass modern shipbuilders. In India, it's Manu, warned by a fish, yes, a fish, that a great flood is coming. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive when Zeus decides to hit the reset button. Different names, different boats, same soaking disaster. The pattern is almost too neat. Divine punishment. One or two lucky survivors. The world washed clean, starting fresh. A mythological control plus alt plus delete. You can almost hear the gods muttering, well, that got out of hand. Let's try again. Congrats, you're humanity's houseplant, being watered a little too aggressively. Of course, there's a darker undertone. Flood myths aren't just bedtime stories. They echo real memories, disasters passed down through generations. Seas rising at the end of the Ice Age. Rivers bursting their banks. Tsunamis wiping out coastlines. Imagine watching your world vanish overnight, then trying to explain it to your children. The gods were angry is simpler than complex climate shifts over millennia. You kick against the water, searching for something solid. A tree trunk drifts by, stripped bare. A roof floats past, still clinging to its beams. Somewhere in the distance, a child cries. This isn't myth, it's survival. And survival stories tend to grow into legends. The funny thing? We romanticize floods in hindsight. They become grand narratives of cleansing, rebirth, moral lessons. But in the moment, they were just horrifying. Mud swallowing homes. Families scattered. Livestock drowned. The stench of rot hanging for months. Imagine losing everything, then being told centuries later that your trauma became a mythic archetype. Comforting, isn't it? Still, the myths persist because they tell us something we don't want to admit. Nothing is permanent. Civilizations, cities, even mountains, washed away, reset, forgotten. You might build marble towers or carve poems into stone, but one good flood, and you're just another layer of silt. The rain keeps falling. Your arms ache. The horizon is nothing but gray water blending into gray sky. You start to understand why these myths carried such weight. When the flood comes, it doesn't just take land. It takes certainty. It reminds you the world is fragile and you are small. And yet, there's hope too. In every version, someone survives. Someone rebuilds. The flood doesn't erase everything. It forces renewal. That's the part we cling to. The promise that even after catastrophe, there's still a chance to start again. You find a patch of higher ground, crawling onto it like some exhausted amphibian. The soil is wet, soft, but it holds. You lie there, dripping, staring at the sky, waiting for the gods to get bored and move on. And in your mind, you hear echoes of every story, every survivor, every culture whispering the same lesson. Water always wins, but life always crawls back. Flood myths, then, aren't really about drowning. They're about what comes after. They're humanity's way of admitting defeat while stubbornly refusing to disappear. So yes, you're soaked, shivering, clinging to mud. But give it time. Someone will come along, call you a culture hero, and turn your soggy misery into sacred history. Lucky you. You wake up to the smell of sulfur. The air is sharp, acrid, like someone left a match burning for a century. Beneath your feet, the ground trembles, not constantly, but in little shivers that keep you uneasy. You're on the island of Thera, better known today as Santorini. But this isn't the postcard version with blue domes and honeymoon selfies. This is the version before the mountain exploded. Here in the Bronze Age lived the Minoans. Traders, sailors, palace builders. They weren't a myth. They weren't hidden. They were real, until the sea and the earth decided otherwise. And some say their story might have inspired Atlantis. The Minoans had a good run. Their palaces at Knossos and Akrotiri were labyrinthine wonders. Painted walls, indoor plumbing, even flushing toilets. Yes, flushing toilets. While some parts of the world were still figuring out which side of the stick to hold, the Minoans were flushing away like it was no big deal. Civilization at its finest. Congrats, you're ahead of Rome by over 1,000 years. The people of Thera lived in multi-story houses, painted with frescoes of dolphins, lilies, and processions of women in elaborate dresses. They worshipped goddesses, poured wine, and sent ships across the Mediterranean. Life was bustling, colorful, alive. You can almost hear the chatter of markets, the crash of waves against harbors, the smell of olive oil frying in clay pots. And then, the mountain woke up. Around 1600 BCE, Thera erupted in one of the most violent explosions the Earth has ever staged. Imagine ash clouds blotting out the sun. Imagine a column of fire so tall it scarred the sky. Imagine the sea itself pulled back, then roaring forward as a wall of water. Whole towns buried under pumice and ash. Ships smashed like toys. People who thought themselves untouchable. Sound familiar? It should. Atlantis, perhaps? Plato spoke of a proud island civilization swallowed by the sea in a single day. He didn't name the Minoans, but the echoes line up a little too neatly. A flourishing culture, rich in art and trade, undone by catastrophe. Not myth. Not allegory. Just history, cruel and unstoppable. You walk through the ruins of Akrotiri, the Pompeii of the Aegean. Streets frozen in ash. Jars toppled mid-meal. Staircases leading nowhere. It's haunting, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Unlike Atlantis, you don't have to imagine this. You can touch it. You can feel the grit of ash on your palms. And yet, there's still mystery. The eruption was apocalyptic, but it didn't wipe out the Minoans overnight. They limped on for a while, weakened, vulnerable. Maybe it was earthquakes. Maybe tsunamis. Maybe invading Mycenaeans finally finished them off. Collapse, as always, is never clean. It's a long, messy process with multiple culprits. But the eruption set the stage. The irony? For all their brilliance, the Minoans left no epic tales, no written records we can fully read. Their script, linear, remains undeciphered. So, while their walls whisper stories in paint, their voices remain locked. Atlantis may have stolen their thunder, but silence is the crueler theft. You step out of the ruins and onto the edge of the caldera. The sea fills what once was a mountain. It glitters in the sun, deceptively calm, as if nothing ever happened. Tourists today sip wine on terraces, watching sunsets over the same crater that ended a civilization. The world forgets quickly. But you remember. The smell of sulfur. The tremor of the ground. The sudden, terrifying awareness that nothing built by human hands can stand against fire and sea. The Minoans were real. Their disaster was real. And if their fate echoes Atlantis, it's not because myth hid the truth. It's because myth has always been a lazy summary of history. So, next time someone tells you Atlantis was the greatest lost civilization, remind them, it might have already been found. We just renamed it Santorini and turned it into a honeymoon package. You wake up underwater. Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Salt stings your eyes, pressure hums in your ears, and everything is tinted that hazy blue-green of a half-lit dream. Below you, the seabed rises, and suddenly, shapes appear. Steps. Platforms. Terraces. It looks like a city, drowned and waiting. Welcome to Yonaguni. Off the coast of Japan, near Okinawa, divers discovered something strange in the 1980s. What at first seemed like natural rock formations turned out to be, well, something else. Massive stone structures, staircases carved with straight edges, flat terraces that look suspiciously like plazas. Some even claim there are carvings, faint, ghostly, like graffiti left by a civilization we forgot to invite to the history books. You drift lower, your fingers brushing along sharp ridges. The stone feels deliberate, too geometric to be an accident. And yet, geologists argue the opposite. Sandstone fractures naturally into these shapes. Nature, not humans, built this. Which is it? A forgotten city, or a very dramatic pile of rocks? Congrats, you've stumbled onto archaeology's version of Is It Cake? The ruins stretch about 490 feet long and rise 90 feet high, like a submerged ziggurat. If you didn't know better, you'd swear it was a ceremonial center. A place where people gathered, maybe even worshipped. Some fringe theories go further. Yonaguni was part of Mu or Lemuria, or some other lost super-civilization that sank into the sea thousands of years ago. Convenient, isn't it? But let's drag this back to reality. If Yonaguni was man-made, the date would be staggering. Around 10,000 years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels were lower. Maybe it was land back then and people carved it. That would make it older than the pyramids. Older than Stonehenge. A civilization rewriting everything we thought we knew. And if it's just natural sandstone? Well, then nature has a wicked sense of humor, building her own Atlantis just to mess with us. You swim along one of the stair-like structures. Fish dart past, indifferent. Algae coats the stone, softening the edges, making it harder to tell what's natural and what's not. The ocean, as always, isn't interested in giving you clarity. It prefers mystery. Divers have reported pillars, roads, even what looks like a giant human face carved into the stone. Are these genuine relics, or just the brain's habit of seeing patterns where none exist? Pareidolia works overtime underwater. Give humans a shadow, and we'll see gods. Give us a rock, and we'll see civilizations. Spoiler alert, no definitive answer exists. What makes Yonaguni unsettling isn't just the uncertainty, it's the possibility. If it is man-made, it hints at an advanced culture predating everything we currently accept. If it isn't, it still reminds us how little separates civilization from geology in the human imagination. One person's temple is another person's cliff. You hover for a moment in the quiet. The ocean muffles everything. No birds, no wind, just the sound of your own breathing, bubbling into the blue. Down here, you can almost believe in forgotten cities. You can almost hear faint echoes of voices, footsteps, rituals. You can almost trick yourself into thinking history is waiting just under the waves, if only you dive deep enough. And maybe that's the point. Yanaguni sits on the edge of what we know and what we want to believe. A place where myth and geology shake hands, smirk, and refuse to explain themselves. You surface, gasping, the salt still burning your throat. Behind you, the sea is calm, deceptively ordinary. But you know what's down there now, something that looks like a city, feels like a secret, and refuses to let go of either story. Lost civilization? Natural wonder? Both? Neither? The ocean doesn't care. It keeps its mysteries drowned, leaving you to argue about them on land. You wake up on a dusty hillside in southeastern Turkey. The sun is merciless, beating down on dry soil that crumbles under your fingers. Nothing grows here except weeds and stubborn scrub. At first glance, it looks like the middle of nowhere. Then you see the stones. They rise out of the earth like teeth, tall, carved, arranged in circles. T-shaped pillars, some over 16 feet high, etched with animals, foxes, snakes, vultures, lions. This isn't random rubble. This is Göbekli Tepe. And it shouldn't exist. Here's why. Archaeologists date it to around 9,600 BC. That's over 11,000 years ago. A time when humans were supposed to be hunter-gatherers, living in small groups, chasing game, maybe dabbling in farming. Not carving megaliths. Not building stone temples. Not gathering hundreds of people to drag limestone pillars into circles like it was no big deal. Congrats, you just broke history's timeline. The accepted story used to be simple. First farming, then villages, then cities, then temples. You can thank Göbekli Tepe for flipping that order upside down. Here, it looks like the temples came first. People gathered to build, worship, feast, and only then settled down long enough to invent agriculture. Civilization didn't grow temples. Temples may have grown civilization. You walk between the pillars. The air is hot, dry, buzzing with insects. Each stone looms over you, carved with creatures both real and symbolic. A scorpion frozen mid-crawl. A vulture with wings spread. Some images repeat, as if they meant something sacred. But no one left instructions. No written language. Just stone, staring back at you with the smug silence of eternity. And then, the kicker, Göbekli Tepe wasn't abandoned in ruins. It was deliberately buried. Layer after layer of earth shoveled over the site, hiding it for thousands of years. Someone decided the world wasn't ready for this story. Or maybe they just wanted to move on. Either way, it lay hidden until the 1990s when archaeologists finally brushed it off and said, "Wait, what? The site challenges everything. Who built it? How did they organize the labor? Why spend so much energy on ritual when survival was already a full-time job? And why, after all that effort, did they bury it like a secret too heavy to carry?" Spoiler alert, nobody knows. Theories abound, of course. Some say it was a center of worship, the earliest known temple complex. Others argue it was a gathering place, where scattered groups came together seasonally, forging community. And the fringe? Well, they've had a field day. Aliens, lost civilizations, Atlantean survivors, the usual suspects. But you don't need aliens to be impressed. Humans did this. 10,000 years ago. With stone tools and persistence that would make a modern contractor weep. You place your hand on one of the pillars. It's warm from the sun, rough beneath your palm. You imagine the people who carved it, hauling it upright with ropes and sweat. You imagine the sound of drums, the smell of roasting meat, the chanting of voices rising into the night. This wasn't just survival. This was meaning, symbol, ritual. And then you realize, the past is stranger than the myths. Atlantis? Lemuria? Fun stories. But here, in the dust, is something undeniable. And far older than anyone expected. Humanity didn't stumble into civilization by accident. It clawed its way into being, starting with stones on a hill that made no practical sense, except that humans need stories, and stories need monuments. The wind kicks up dust, stinging your eyes. The pillars loom around you, silent, enigmatic, daring you to explain them. You can't. Not fully. But you know one thing. If there was ever a place that proves forgotten civilizations are more than fantasy, this is it. And no ocean was needed. Just time, burial, and silence. You wake up in the dark. Not the cozy kind of dark where you can still make out the shape of your ceiling fan. No, this is the suffocating kind. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but you can feel the air, cool, stale, thick with centuries of human breath. You're underground, in Derinkuyu, the hidden city beneath Cappadocia, Turkey. At first, it feels like a cave. But as you move forward, the tunnels keep going. Narrow corridors, twisting staircases, chambers opening into larger halls. Then more tunnels. And more. Before long, you realize this isn't a cave. It's an entire city, carved into the earth, layer by layer, descending almost 300 feet down. Congrats, you've just discovered humanity's weirdest form of introversion. Derinkuyu wasn't small. At its peak, it could hold 20,000 people. 20,000. Underground. Families, livestock, storage rooms, wells, kitchens, even a wine press. You thought your apartment walls were thin? Try living next to a cow in a rock hallway. And here's the fun part. No one's entirely sure who built it. The first layers might date back to the Phrygians around the 8th century BC. Later, early Christians expanded it, using it as a refuge from invading armies. Imagine spending months down here, praying in underground chapels while soldiers trampled the land above. What did you do today? Oh, survived another siege in my basement. The design was ingenious. Massive stone doors, circular boulders, could roll across passageways to seal off sections. Ventilation shafts kept air flowing, disguised at the surface as harmless wells. If you're picturing medieval panic rooms, you're close, except this was on a scale so massive it makes a panic room look like a shoebox. You shuffle deeper. The walls are rough, the ceiling low. You duck instinctively, imagining the generations who walked these same paths. The silence is eerie. No windows. No birds. Just the drip of water somewhere in the distance. Claustrophobia settles on your chest like a second skin. And yet, down here there was life. Children laughing. Fires crackling. The smell of bread baking in hidden ovens. The underground world wasn't just a last resort. It was home when it had to be. A reminder that humans will go to absurd lengths to keep surviving, even if it means living like moles. Spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly paradise. Fresh air was limited. Fires smoked up the chambers. Disease must have spread like gossip at a wedding. And imagine the sound, echoes of hundreds of people and animals packed into stone corridors. Forget Atlantis's crystal palaces. This was survival at its grittiest. Still it worked. Empires rose and fell above ground, armies came and went, and Derinkuyu kept its people safe in the belly of the earth. For centuries, it was forgotten, sealed, hidden under layers of soil and memory. Locals knew of cave dwellings, but the full scale wasn't rediscovered until the 1960s, when a man knocked down a wall in his house and found a tunnel. Imagine explaining that to your contractor. You pause at the bottom of a staircase, the rock cool against your hand. You think about how much effort it took to carve this place, pick by pick, stone by stone, over centuries. Not glamorous, not legendary, just determined. A civilization not lost to the sea, but buried deliberately, living in the shadows until it was no longer needed. Derinkuyu proves a point. Lost civilizations don't always vanish. Sometimes they just go underground, literally. Sometimes survival means choosing darkness over destruction. You turn back toward the stairwell. The air is heavy, but not unfriendly. The silence almost feels protective. And you realize, maybe myth was never about shining cities or crystal towers. Maybe the real story is that humans are stubborn enough to live anywhere, even 18 stories beneath their own nightmares. You wake up in a city. Not Athens, not Rome, older. Much older. The streets are wide, straight, laid out in perfect grids. Houses rise on either side, made of baked bricks that look like they were pulled from a modern construction site. There's running water, drains, even a sewer system. And then it hits you. You're standing in the Indus Valley civilization, around 2500 BC. Here's the thing, you probably haven't heard much about it. We talk endlessly about Egypt and Mesopotamia, but the Indus? It gets left out of the spotlight, like the quiet genius in the back of the classroom. And yet, at its peak, it stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, with cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa housing tens of thousands. Congrats, you've stumbled into one of history's most advanced civilizations, and no one invited you to the TED Talk. The city smells faintly of clay and smoke. Water trickles down covered drains beneath your feet. You see people walking in loose garments, carrying baskets, trading goods in bustling marketplaces. Somewhere, a potter's wheel spins. Somewhere else, a child chases a dog down a side street. Life feels organized, intentional, civilization with zoning laws, long before anyone else thought of them. What's striking is the order. Streets run north to south, east to west, like a carefully drawn blueprint. Houses often had their own wells. Public baths gleamed with brick-lined pools, suggesting that hygiene wasn't just a luxury, it was a civic duty. While Egyptians were busy stacking giant tombs for dead kings, the Indus people were making sure everyone had indoor plumbing. But here's the mystery, we don't know what they called themselves. Their writing, etched on seals and tablets, remains undeciphered. Tiny symbols, animals, patterns. Maybe it was language, maybe accounting, maybe both. Without translation, their voices are mute. We walk through their cities like uninvited guests, impressed but clueless. And then the silence deepens. Around 1900 BCE, the cities decline. Not suddenly, not in flames, but gradually. Streets empty. Brick walls crumble. Drains clog. Some blame shifting rivers. Others point to drought, climate change, or disease. Maybe it was all of them. Civilizations rarely fall to one villain. It's usually death by committee. You climb a staircase, standing above the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro. It looks like a modern swimming pool, brick-lined, carefully sealed, with steps leading down into the water. Ritual? Hygiene? Both? Whatever the answer, it whispers of a society that cared about more than just survival. They valued community, ritual, maybe even comfort. And then Tzkan. Spoiler alert, the Indus didn't vanish into myth. They left ruins, artifacts, clues. But because we can't read their script, they remain frustratingly out of reach. Atlantis gets more attention, despite being fictional, while the Indus Valley, real, vast, sophisticated, sits in textbooks gathering dust. The irony? Their collapse wasn't dramatic. No fiery apocalypse, no volcanic eruption. Just slow decline, like a candle burning down. Which might be why we forget them. We prefer grand endings, cities swallowed in a day. Not centuries of gradual fading, one clogged drain at a time. You step into a shadowed alley. The bricks are warm under your palm. Somewhere in these walls are the stories of merchants, farmers, priests, children. People who built one of the first urban worlds, then left it behind. They didn't need myth to make them great. They were great already. We're just bad at remembering. The wind blows dust across the ruins. Tourists snap photos, muttering about the Indian pyramids. But you know better. These weren't pyramids for kings. These were streets for people. A civilization that built quietly, lived orderly, and disappeared without fireworks. And maybe that's the cruelest fate of all. Not drowning, not burning, but being forgotten because you weren't dramatic enough. You wake up in the jungle. The air is heavy, wet, like breathing through a damp blanket. Cicadas scream from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a howler monkey makes a sound that can only be described as existential dread with fur. You push through vines and suddenly stop. A face is staring at you. Not a small face, not even a human-sized one. A colossal stone head, carved from basalt, taller than you, heavier than a truck. Its features are broad, its lips full, its helmet-like headdress mysterious. This is Olmec country. Welcome to the civilization you've probably never learned about but definitely should have. The Olmecs thrived in what's now Mexico between 1200 and 400 BC. They didn't build pyramids like the Maya or leave behind massive empires like the Aztecs. What they left were clues, heads, figurines, ceremonial centers that whisper of a people sophisticated, symbolic, and frustratingly elusive. Congrats, you've stumbled onto a culture that invented half the things later Mesoamerican civilizations get credit for. Take writing, for example. Evidence suggests the Olmecs may have developed one of the earliest scripts in the Americas. They also played the famous Mesoamerican ball game, which, spoiler alert, often ended with ritual sacrifice. Fun family outing. They laid out ceremonial centers, aligned with stars and rivers, hinting at a cosmology as complex as their stonework. And then there are the heads. 17 of them have been found so far, scattered across sites like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Each one unique, carved with painstaking detail. Were they rulers? Gods? Team mascots? No one knows for certain. But they loom in the jungle like silent guardians, daring you to explain them. You run your hand along one. The stone is smooth, cool despite the heat. Imagine hauling this thing, some weighing up to 40 tons, across swamps and rivers, using nothing but manpower, ropes, and stubbornness. You complain about moving a couch. The Olmecs moved mountains of basalt just to immortalize a face. And yet, for all their influence, the Olmecs remain shadowy. We don't know their original name. Olmec means rubber people, a label given by later cultures. Their cities have crumbled, their temples lost to time, their voices erased. What survives are the artifacts, enigmatic, out of context, like finding puzzle pieces with no picture on the box. Theories bloom in the gaps. Some fringe ideas claim the heads prove contact with Africans or other distant peoples. The facial features, they argue, look too different to be local. But anthropology says otherwise. The heads are distinctly Mesoamerican, shaped by the hands and imagination of the people who lived here. No need for aliens or transoceanic visitors. Just humans, carving their leaders into stone because stone lasts longer than flesh. You step back, the jungle buzzing louder around you. The heads don't blink, don't move, but they feel alive somehow. Watching. Waiting. Reminders that civilizations don't need to be massive to matter. Influence ripples outward. Later cultures borrowed Olmec symbols, Olmec games, Olmec ideas. The Olmecs may have faded, but their fingerprints linger everywhere. And like so many others, their end is a mystery. Around 400 BCE, their great centers decline. Rivers shift. Soil depletes. Maybe war, maybe drought, maybe both. The jungle swallows what's left, leaving only the stone faces to outlast the trees. Spoiler alert, this is the Olmec's entire personality, enigmatic, half-hidden, always one step out of reach. You turn away, brushing mud from your hands. The colossal heads fade into the foliage, half-buried, half-forgotten. Tourists will pose with them, textbooks will give them a paragraph, but you'll remember the silence of their gaze. You'll remember that not all civilizations shout their greatness. Some simply stare back at you, carved in stone, long after their voices are gone. You wake up in the desert. The air is bone-dry, sharp enough to crack your lips. Sand crunches beneath your feet, and the horizon wavers in the heat. At first, there's nothing, just rock, endless rock. And then you turn a corner, and the mountain itself opens into a facade. Columns. Pediments. Entire temples carved out of stone like someone was too stubborn to use bricks. Welcome to Petra. This is the land of the Nabateans, a people who took the desert and bent it to their will. Traders, engineers, illusionists of stone, they flourished from the 4th century BCE to the 1st century CE. And like so many others in this story, they eventually vanished, leaving behind architecture too impressive to explain in one breath. The Nabateans weren't just builders, they were magicians of water. In a desert where rainfall is a rumor, they created complex systems of channels, cisterns, and dams. Every drop was captured, stored, redirected. While other civilizations prayed for rain, the Nabateans engineered it. Congrats, you've just been outsmarted by people living in the middle of nowhere 2,000 years ago. You step into the narrow canyon leading to Petra. The walls rise above you, red sandstone glowing in the sun. It feels like walking through the Earth's bloodstream. Then suddenly, there it is. The treasury, Al-Khazna, carved with impossible precision. Columns as tall as trees, statues gazing down, all carved directly into the cliff face. Not built, carved. The audacity of it takes your breath away. Petra was no hidden village. It was a cosmopolitan hub, positioned along trade routes connecting Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Frankincense, spices, textiles, all flowed through here. The Nabateans grew rich, and they advertised their wealth in stone. Temples, tombs, theaters. You walk through their streets and feel the hum of a city that once bustled with merchants, camels, and endless bargaining. And then, silence. By the 3rd century CE, Petra began to fade. Trade routes shifted. The Romans absorbed the Nabatean kingdom, and the desert reclaimed what was left. Earthquakes crumbled the walls. The city fell quiet. For centuries, Petra was little more than a rumor, whispered of by locals, ignored by the outside world until European explorers rediscovered it in the 19th century, as if it had ever truly disappeared for the people who lived nearby. Spoiler alert, Lost City usually means Westerners finally noticed. Still, Petra lingers in myth. Some compare it to Atlantis, as if stone carved into mountains could somehow slip into fantasy. Others romanticize it as a city of mystery hidden from the world. The truth is simpler and more impressive. Petra wasn't lost. It just outlived its makers. You run your hand along the sandstone. It crumbles under your touch, fragile despite its grandeur. The Nabateans built for eternity, but time is patient. Even stone erodes. Even mountains collapse. And yet, what remains is enough to remind you of their genius. What's striking is how little we know of the Nabateans themselves. Their inscriptions are scarce, their language only partly understood. They lived in the cracks of empires, leaving behind monuments without manifestos. They didn't shout their story, they carved it and then walked away. You stand in the shadow of the treasury. The air is still hot, buzzing faintly with insects. For a moment, you imagine the city alive again, markets bustling, water trickling through channels, camels snorting at the heat. And then it fades, leaving only silence and stone. Petra proves something uncomfortable. Civilizations don't need to fall into the sea to vanish. They can build the most breathtaking city in the desert, master water, master trade, and still disappear when the world changes around them. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest lesson. You can carve your name into mountains, but even mountains eventually forget. You wake up in the fog. The air is damp, smelling of moss and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blows. A forest surrounds you, dense, dripping, alive with crows that seem far too interested in your presence. You push through the trees and stumble into a clearing. Wooden palisades rise, encircling a hill fort. Inside, people are busy, smiths hammering metal, women weaving, warriors sharpening blades that catch the misty light. Welcome to the world of the Celts. Now, forget the cartoon version of burly men in plaids shouting, "Freedom!" The Celts weren't a single tribe or kingdom. They were a sprawling mosaic of cultures, stretching from Ireland to Turkey, bound together by language, art, and a taste for swirling patterns that looked suspiciously psychedelic. They thrived across Europe from around 1200 BCE until the Roman steamroller flattened most of them. Congrats, you've landed in the middle of Europe's greatest forgotten civilization. Life here is vibrant. You hear laughter, the clang of metal, the chatter of merchants. Contrary to Roman propaganda, the Celts weren't just wild-eyed barbarians. They traded across Europe, worked gold into intricate jewelry, and wielded iron swords that could cut through more than just stereotypes. Their art curls in spirals and knots, abstract designs that seem almost modern. And then there are the Druids. No, not old men in white robes summoning thunderstorms with wands. Think priest, judge, philosopher, and political influencer rolled into one. Druids held knowledge, passed laws, performed rituals, and supposedly memorized entire histories without writing anything down. Which is impressive until you realize that's why we don't have their side of the story. Oral tradition doesn't do well when your enemies write the history books. Spoiler alert, most of what we know about the Celts comes from the Romans, who had an agenda. Julius Caesar described them as fierce warriors, prone to drinking too much and fighting even more. Basically, the neighbors you don't want throwing a house party. Of course, Caesar also wanted to justify conquering them, so maybe take his Yelp review with a grain of salt. The Celts were also spiritual, their world animated by gods of rivers, forests, war, and fertility. Sacred groves became their temples. Offerings, sometimes human ones, were made in bogs and lakes. Archaeologists have dredged up preserved bodies from peat bogs, twisted in ritual death. The Celts didn't just believe in gods, they negotiated with them. And their gods always collected. You walk through the settlement. Children chase each other through mud, chickens scatter, warriors ride horses painted with spirals and stripes. The air tastes of iron and earth. It's messy, alive, unpolished, but undeniably human. And then you remember, this is a civilization erased not by vanishing but by absorption. Rome saw the Celts as barbarians. Yet Rome also borrowed their ideas. Chainmail armor? Toad. Even the word Gallic still clings to France. The Celts didn't vanish, they got rebranded. But memory is cruel. History books prefer empires with marble columns and written laws. The Celts left behind hill forts, jewelry, weapons, and myths. The rest? Lost to mist and silence. Their descendants carried echoes, but the grand civilization became a footnote. You climb the wooden wall of the fort and gaze over the forest. For a moment, you imagine the Celtic world at its peak, tribes spanning Europe, warriors clashing with Rome, druids whispering secrets in oak groves. And then it fades, swallowed by empire, Christianization, and the long erosion of oral tradition. What remains are fragments. Spiral patterns on broken pottery. Gold torques gleaming in museum glass. Names carved by outsiders. Whispers in misty fields. The irony is sharp. The Celts shaped Europe, but we remember them mostly through the insults of those who conquered them. The wind rises, rustling the trees. You hear the faint echo of a horn, distant now, fading into the fog. The Celts are gone, but their ghosts are everywhere. In the knots of ancient designs, in the place names of Europe, in the forests that still hum with something older than Rome. And you realize, forgotten doesn't mean gone. It just means buried, waiting, like the mist, to return. You wake up in the desert. The air is thin, dry, and sharp, the kind that leaves your throat scratching for water. Red rock mesas rise around you, carved by wind into shapes that look almost intentional. And then you see them. Houses tucked into the cliffside, stacked like honeycombs. Doorways and windows cut into stone. Whole neighborhoods clinging to the rock like they grew there. Welcome to the world of the ancestral Puebloans, sometimes still called the Anasazi, though descendants today prefer Puebloans. Their civilization flourished in the American Southwest, across what is now Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, from around 100 CE to 1600 CE. And if you're looking for drama, you won't find Atlantis here. What you'll find instead is something stranger, cities that seem to defy the landscape itself. You step closer to a cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde. The walls are stone, smooth, fitted together with the kind of precision you'd expect from a mason with unlimited time and no other hobbies. Rooms are small, cozy, dark. Ladders lean against doorways, leading up into higher levels. Below, round, sunken spaces called kivas wait like open mouths, ritual chambers where firelight flickered, and stories, ceremonies, and maybe secrets filled the night. The ancestral Puebloans weren't just cliffside decorators. They were astronomers, architects, and engineers of water. In Chaco Canyon, they built massive complexes, great houses, with hundreds of rooms, walls aligned perfectly with solstices and lunar cycles. They carved roads straight across the desert, some miles long, leading to nowhere obvious, as if they were connecting the cosmos itself. Congrats, you've stumbled into a civilization that built star maps out of stone while you can't even remember your Netflix password. But here's the thing, their world was fragile. Agriculture depended on rain that didn't always come. Droughts hit, sometimes lasting decades. Crops withered, resources strained. And as archaeologists tell it, the stress spread into communities. Evidence hints at conflict, at social breakdown. By the late 1200s, many cliff dwellings were abandoned. Cue them as tourists and early scholars like to say the Puebloans vanished. Which is a neat word if you're writing a mystery novel, but terrible if you're talking about real people. Civilizations don't vanish. They adapt, move, change. Descendants of the ancestral Puebloans still live in the Southwest today, in Hopi, Zuni, and other Pueblo communities. They carry forward traditions, languages, rituals. The cliff dwellings are ruins, not tombs. You climb a ladder, ducking into a narrow doorway. The air inside is cool, shaded, still. Imagine families here, cooking corn, weaving, telling stories, children darting in and out of the rooms. Life was communal, tied to cycles of the sun and rain, to rituals in kivas, to balance with the land. Hard, yes, but also rich in meaning. Spoiler alert, moving out of a cliff house isn't proof of collapse, it's proof of survival. When the land pushed, the people shifted. That's resilience, not disappearance. Yet we like our lost civilizations to stay lost. It makes for better headlines, better documentaries, better myths. The truth is less dramatic but far more human. The people of these cliffs didn't vanish. They just stopped living where we expected them to. You step out onto a ledge. The desert stretches endlessly, painted in reds and golds. The cliff dwellings look almost alive, as if they're waiting for someone to come back. But the only sound is wind whistling through stone doorways. And you realize the irony. We chase after vanished cities in the ocean, we invent myths of continents that never existed, while here in the desert are real ruins, real people, real stories, and we call them mysteries simply because we don't want to listen to the descendants who never left. The sun dips lower, shadows creeping along the rock face. You hear the faint creak of a ladder, though no one is there. The silence of the cliffs presses close, a reminder, civilizations don't vanish. We just forget where to look. You wake up in the jungle. The air is wet, heavy, thick with the smell of damp leaves and soil that never quite dries. Cicadas scream like broken alarms. Somewhere in the canopy, a monkey hurls something at you that you don't want to identify. And then you see it, a tower rising above the trees, carved with serene faces that smile like they know something you don't. Welcome to Angkor. This was the heart of the Khmer Empire, one of the greatest civilizations of Southeast Asia, stretching across Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. At its peak in the 12th century, Angkor was the largest city on Earth. Over 1 million people lived here, while London was still a muddy outpost with questionable plumbing. Congrats, you've stumbled into a metropolis that makes medieval Europe look like a backwater. The temples are the showstoppers. Angkor Wat, sprawling across hundreds of acres, carved in stone with endless galleries of gods, demons, and dancers frozen mid-step. Angkor Thom, with its massive faces staring in every direction, like a spiritual surveillance system. And everywhere, the jungle presses close, roots crawling over walls, trees bursting through roofs, as if the forest decided to repossess the mortgage. But it wasn't just stone and spectacle. The Khmer were water engineers on a scale that boggles the mind. They carved canals, reservoirs, and barrages, massive artificial lakes, turning seasonal monsoons into a reliable water supply. Their system fed rice fields that stretched to the horizon. Water was their lifeblood, their weapon, their miracle. And yet, water was also their undoing. Around the 14th century, the system faltered. Climate shifted. Droughts scorched the land. When the rains finally came, they came too hard, flooding the weakened canals. Fields failed, cities strained, people scattered. Add in wars, invasions, and shifting trade, and the empire unraveled. Slowly, quietly, the jungle crept back in. Spoiler alert, if you build the biggest city on Earth, don't assume it'll last. You wander through Angkor Wat. The walls are cool under your hand, carved with bas-reliefs of armies marching, gods battling demons, and apsaras, celestial dancers, smiling as if nothing ever changes. The carvings outlived the empire. The people who built them? Gone, scattered, absorbed into new kingdoms. The temples stand like empty shells, haunted by echoes. European explorers in the 19th century discovered Angkor, wide-eyed at the sight of stone swallowed by trees. As if the Cambodians living nearby hadn't noticed. As if ruins only exist when outsiders declare them found. Same old story. Still, Angkor holds a kind of hypnotic power. The scale, the artistry, the audacity of carving cities out of jungle, it sticks in your mind. And yet, despite all its grandeur, the empire collapsed under the same pressures as many others. Climate, politics, hubris. You can master water for centuries, but eventually, the monsoon wins. You sit in the shade of a temple, watching roots coil through stone. The jungle is patient. Empires are not. The Khmer built monuments to eternity, and eternity shrugged. The irony is that Angkor isn't lost. People still live around it. Monks still walk its steps. The temples remain active religious sites. But in the global imagination, it's another lost civilization, another story of glory and ruin. The truth is messy. Angkor isn't just a ruin. It's a reminder that size and power don't guarantee survival. You can build the biggest city the world has ever seen, align your temples with the stars, feed 1 million mouths, and still, one drought too many, one flood too much, and the forest takes back what you borrowed. The cicadas drone louder. The sun burns through the canopy. The serene stone faces keep smiling, as if amused by your awe or by your ignorance. You feel very small, very temporary, standing in the ruins of the world's greatest city that the world forgot. And then it hits you. The jungle always wins. You wake up to the sound of drums. Not jungle drums, not war drums, ceremonial, steady, like a heartbeat carried across the prairie. The air is cool, damp with morning fog rising from the Mississippi River. You look around and see its mounds. Massive earthen mounds rising from the flat land like green pyramids. People are everywhere. Farmers hauling baskets of corn, traders bartering, children running through packed streets. Welcome to Cahokia, the city you've probably never heard of. This was the greatest metropolis of pre-Columbian North America, flourishing between 1050 and 1350 CE. At its peak, it may have housed 20,000 people, larger than London at the same time. Right here in what is now Illinois. No pyramids of stone, no temples of marble, but earth, sweat, wood, and corn built into something extraordinary. Congrats, you've woken up in America's first forgotten city. The centerpiece is Monk's Mound, a colossal platform of earth, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. From its summit, you'd see a city stretching miles in every direction. Plazas, neighborhoods, stockades, fields. Wooden poles stood like solar calendars, marking solstices, turning the city itself into a giant cosmic clock. You wander through narrow lanes. The smell of smoke and maize fills the air. Cahokia thrived on agriculture, especially corn, which fueled population growth and trade. Shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the Rockies, goods flowed in, carried on rivers and roads that tied the continent together. This wasn't an isolated village. It was a hub. And yet, you won't find Cahokia in many history books. But probably because it doesn't fit the narrative. We're used to hearing about advanced civilizations in Mexico, Peru, Egypt, but a city of tens of thousands in the middle of North America? That makes us uncomfortable. It doesn't align with the myth that the continent was an untouched wilderness before Europeans arrived. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Cahokia's rise was meteoric. Around 1050, its population surged, transforming it into a regional powerhouse. Rituals, politics, trade, all centered here. But by the 1300s, decline set in. The reasons are debated. Deforestation stripped the landscape. Erosion and floods may have wrecked fields. Overcrowding bred conflict. Climate shifts made harvests unpredictable. Added up, and the city strained under its own success. You climb Monk's Mound. The earth is damp under your feet, heavy with centuries of rain and memory. From the top, you can almost hear the echoes. Ceremonies in the plazas, leaders addressing the crowds, rituals played out under the sky. This was a place where power and belief intertwined. And now it's grass. Silent mounds rising from suburban Illinois next to highways and baseball fields. Archaeologists call Cahokia a complex chiefdom, which is a fancy way of saying organized society that didn't quite fit the empire mold. Labels aside, it was urban, monumental, and deeply influential. Its memory lingers in native traditions, though the city itself slipped into obscurity. You walk back down, the drums fading. The irony is sharp. We obsess over mythical cities like Atlantis, while an actual metropolis, larger than London, centuries older than Columbus, sits uncelebrated in the American heartland. No myths, no aliens. Just people. Farmers, builders, dreamers, exhausted parents trying to keep kids from rolling down the mounds. The city declined, but the people didn't vanish. Their descendants live on among native nations, carrying fragments of the traditions Cahokia once embodied. The mounds remain as quiet monuments, stubborn reminders of a history too often erased. The wind rustles through the grass. Cars roar faintly on a nearby highway, oblivious. You stand in the shadow of Monk's Mound, feeling small against the weight of what once was. Cahokia doesn't need to be Atlantis to be impressive. It was real, it was vast, and it was forgotten, not by accident, but by design. And maybe that's the cruelest truth. You can build the greatest city of your age, and history will still pretend you were never here. You wake up in a bookstore. Not an ancient ruin this time, but the New Age section. The smell of incense wafts through the air. Dream catchers hang from the ceiling, and someone in the corner is explaining how Atlantis ran on crystal-powered energy grids. You consider leaving, but curiosity keeps you trapped. Welcome to the strange afterlife of lost civilizations. Atlantis didn't just become a story, it became a brand. Over the centuries, people stuffed it with whatever they wanted to believe. Theosophists claimed it was the cradle of a forgotten master race. Mystics said Atlanteans harnessed psychic powers. And modern conspiracy fans? They'll tell you Atlantis had lasers, UFOs, and Wi-Fi before we did. Congrats, you've walked into the gift shop of pseudo-history. The crystals are the stars of the show. Supposedly, Atlanteans used giant quartz towers to store and beam energy across the city, powering everything from flying machines to underwater death rays. Because, of course, if you're going to sink your city, you might as well do it in style. The problem? Crystals don't actually work like that. They look nice on a shelf, but they won't charge your iPhone. Then there's the idea that Atlantis had nuclear weapons, or something suspiciously similar. According to fringe theorists, the city destroyed itself in a cataclysm of its own making, a cautionary tale about technological arrogance. Sounds poetic, but here's the catch. Plato never mentioned nukes. He just talked about floods and earthquakes. The rest is centuries of people filling in the blanks with their favorite apocalypse. You flip through a glossy book. Diagrams of pyramids, beams of light, Atlantean power grids, spanning the globe. Theories connecting Stonehenge, the pyramids, and Easter Island into a network of lost superscience. It's ambitious, sure. But there's one problem, it's also nonsense. Ancient people didn't need Wi-Fi or death lasers to be impressive. They had something better, human labor, ingenuity, and a lot of spare time. Spoiler alert, just because we don't understand how someone built something doesn't mean aliens or crystals did it. But here's the thing, you get why people fall for it. The myths of Atlantean technology scratch an itch. We want to believe we're not the first to figure things out. That somewhere long ago, someone had all the answers and lost them. It makes history feel like a treasure hunt, with secret knowledge buried under ruins. And, conveniently, it makes buying a $200 crystal lamp feel like a spiritual investment. Meanwhile, the real evidence, archaeological ruins, stone tools, irrigation canals, sits quietly in museums, ignored because it's not shiny enough. A carved stone plow isn't as fun as a crystal-powered spaceship. Reality rarely competes with fantasy, especially when fantasy comes with an aura lamp and a free meditation guide. You set the book back on the shelf. The store hums with chatter. Someone is lecturing about Lemurian healing frequencies. Another insists that pyramids are ancient batteries. And in a corner, a man swears the government is hiding Atlantean technology under the ocean floor. You smile, not because it's true, but because it's absurdly human. We can't resist projecting ourselves onto the past. Our fears, our desires, our obsessions, they all get written onto lost civilizations. Sometimes it's nuclear war. Sometimes it's crystal Wi-Fi. Always, it's about us, not them. You step outside. The air is fresh, less cluttered with incense. The world is quieter without Atlantean lasers. But the myths stick with you. They're entertaining, even seductive. And that's the point. Lost civilizations aren't just ruins in the ground. They're canvases for our imagination, for better or worse. The irony? The truth is usually more impressive than the myth. Building a pyramid with copper tools and manpower is harder than inventing a story about UFOs. Digging irrigation canals that last centuries is more miraculous than crystals humming with vibrational energy. Reality doesn't need lasers. It just needs patience. And maybe that's the real lesson. Humans don't like patience. We like shortcuts. We like Atlantis with death rays. You wake up in the 19th century, which is already a bad start. The air smells of coal smoke and questionable medical practices. Spiritualism is booming. Seances, table rapping, clairvoyance, all the rage. And at the center of this occult circus stands one very dramatic figure, Madame Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky didn't just dabble in mysticism. She industrialized it. Russian-born, world-traveled, and endlessly theatrical, she claimed access to hidden knowledge from ancient masters who lived in Tibet, or, depending on the day, in secret caves, astral planes, or maybe the Himalayas. From this supposed wisdom came theosophy, a belief system blending Eastern religions, Western esoterica, and just enough science-sounding jargon to impress a Victorian parlor. Congrats! You're about to learn how an imaginary continent called Lemuria became mainstream. In the mid-1800s, science itself accidentally planted the seed. A zoologist noticed similarities between fossils in India and Madagascar and proposed a missing landmass to explain the connection. He named it Lemuria, after lemurs. Yes, the animals. The theory was later disproven by plate tectonics, but Blavatsky was never one to let facts ruin a good story. She took Lemuria and transformed it into something far juicier, a lost continent, home to an ancient, advanced race. According to her, the Lemurians were one of Earth's root races, giant, spiritually gifted beings who existed before humans as we know them. They supposedly communicated telepathically, reproduced in ways too bizarre to describe over dinner, and eventually destroyed themselves in cataclysmic fashion. Sound familiar? It's Atlantis with extra mysticism and fewer ruins. Blavatsky's books, especially The Secret Doctrine, 1888, turned Lemuria into a cosmic epic. She mixed Darwin's evolution, Hindu cosmology, and her own creative liberties into a mythology that gave Europeans something they craved, a sense of mystical ancestry. Forget being just ordinary humans. Suddenly, you were spiritually descended from psychic giants who lived on a continent swallowed by the ocean. That's a glow-up if there ever was one. Spoiler alert, Blavatsky never saw Lemuria. She just invented it. Theosophy spread fast. It attracted artists, intellectuals, and eccentrics across Europe and America. Lemuria popped up in novels, lectures, even early science fiction. Later, occultists and New Age writers expanded the lore, adding crystal cities, subterranean survivors, and ties to Atlantis. By the 20th century, Lemuria wasn't just a footnote, it was a full-blown fantasy ecosystem. You picture it, an island continent in the Indian or Pacific Ocean, lush with psychic beings meditating under enormous trees, glowing temples humming with cosmic energy. Sounds lovely. Too bad it's all fiction. And yet, like Atlantis, the myth of Lemuria persists. Because it fills the same human need. We long for hidden origins, for lost wisdom buried under the sea. Lemuria became a way to imagine paradise lost, a spiritual homeland for those tired of industrial smoke and urban grit. In a way, it was a protest against modernity, against the feeling that life was getting too mechanical and soulless. You close The Secret Doctrine. The print is dense, the claims outrageous, but the effect undeniable. Blavatsky knew her audience. She gave them something science couldn't: mystery, drama, meaning. Lemuria was never about fossils or lemurs. It was about longing. Step outside the séance parlor. The air is damp with London fog. Horse-drawn carriages rattle by. Somewhere, a factory whistle shrieks. The world feels gray, but in your pocket, you carry the story of a radiant lost continent where giants once thrived. It makes the soot on your collar feel a little less heavy. That's the trick. Myths of lost civilizations don't need evidence. They need yearning. Blavatsky understood that. Lemuria was her gift, or her prank, on modern history. And here's the kicker. Once an idea like that takes hold, it never really dies. Lemuria may be imaginary, but it lives on in New Age circles, conspiracy theories, even in modern spirituality retreats where people swear they channel Lemurian wisdom. The continent never existed. But the myth? That's unsinkable. You wake up in a wellness retreat. The air smells of sage, sandalwood, and overpriced essential oils. Everyone around you is holding a crystal, eyes closed, murmuring about ancient Lemurian frequencies. You're not sure if you accidentally joined a yoga class or a cult, but either way, you're here now. Welcome to Lemuria 2.0, the New Age remix. By the 20th century, Lemuria had fully graduated from Blavatsky's occult textbooks into the broader spiritual marketplace. Forget scientific theories about lemur fossils. Those were long gone. Instead, Lemuria became a mystical brand. A paradise where beings lived in harmony with the universe, used telepathy instead of smartphones, and conveniently stored their wisdom inside quartz crystals for us to find later. Congrats, you're standing in the gift shop of cosmic tourism. The centerpiece is the Lemurian seed crystal. According to believers, these long, striated quartz pieces were programmed by ancient Lemurians before their continent sank. Each line etched into the crystal is supposedly a barcode of wisdom, waiting for you to unlock through meditation. The only catch: the crystals are mostly mined in Brazil, which is, not under the Pacific Ocean. Details. You sit cross-legged, holding a crystal. You wait for enlightenment. Nothing happens except maybe a cramp. But for many, the practice feels real. They report visions, sensations, even messages, proof, at least to them, that Lemuria lives on in spirit. Then there's the channeling. Mediums claim to receive messages from Lemurian beings, usually describing them as tall, gentle, light-filled entities who are very concerned about humanity's spiritual progress. The advice often boils down to love each other, meditate more, buy another workshop ticket. Spoiler alert, cosmic wisdom has a surprisingly good sales department. But Lemuria isn't just crystals and channeled voices. It's also geography, sort of. In the American West, Mt. Shasta in California has become a hotbed of Lemurian lore. Some say survivors of Lemuria retreated there, living in hidden cities inside the mountain, occasionally popping out to guide seekers or leave mysterious glowing lights. If you hike Mt. Shasta today, you'll find both stunning landscapes and a thriving tourist economy built around alien Lemurian coffee mugs. The irony is hard to miss. A continent that never existed now supports crystal shops, retreat centers, and entire communities who base their identity on being Lemurian souls. History evaporates into myth, myth crystallizes into commerce, and commerce becomes belief. You sip herbal tea, watching as people compare visions of their past lives in Lemuria. Some claim to have been healers, others priestesses, a few unlucky ones say they were just farmers. Everyone, though, agrees Lemuria was paradise, peaceful, wise, harmonious. In other words, the exact opposite of the industrial, noisy, often disappointing modern world. That's the heart of it. Lemuria isn't really about the past. It's about longing for a better now. A utopia that explains why life feels off balance, while promising there's a hidden spiritual heritage inside you. And if you don't feel it yet, don't worry. There's always another crystal, another meditation, another guided journey for sale. Step outside. The retreat center fades into silence. The sun dips low. For a moment, You wonder if maybe, just maybe, the believers are onto something. After all, humans have always carried myths like this. Paradises lost, golden ages drowned, wisdom hidden for the worthy. Lemuria just happens to wear a new age hoodie and charge by the hour. You roll the crystal in your palm. It sparkles in the fading light. Maybe it holds ancient knowledge. Or maybe it's just quartz. Either way, it feels heavier than it should, because you're not really holding a rock. You're holding a story, polished and sold to anyone who still dreams of a world that never was. And that, ironically, might be the most powerful energy of all. You wake up underground. It's dark, damp, and surprisingly roomy. You look around, glowing crystals on the walls, wide caverns stretching into the distance, and of course, tall, robed figures with flowing hair who politely inform you that they're from Lemuria. Congratulations, you've stumbled into the hollow earth theory, where lost civilizations don't just vanish, they move downstairs. The hollow earth idea isn't new. People have been imagining secret worlds beneath our feet for centuries. Folktales speak of subterranean realms filled with spirits, monsters, or forgotten ancestors. In the 17th century, some European thinkers even suggested Earth was made of concentric shells, like a cosmic jawbreaker. By the 19th century, writers and mystics ran wild with it, because why stop at mountains when you can put a whole civilization inside the planet? Enter Lemuria. By the early 20th century, certain occult circles claimed the Lemurians didn't actually drown when their continent sank. Instead, they migrated into vast underground cities. The most famous? Telos, supposedly beneath Mt. Shasta in California. If you believe the lore, it's a glittering metropolis powered by crystals, inhabited by peaceful, enlightened beings who occasionally surface to nudge humanity along. Think less mole people and more spiritual landlords. Spoiler alert, geologists have not confirmed any of this. But the appeal is obvious. Underground Lemuria offers everything: survival after catastrophe, hidden wisdom safe from prying eyes, and a secret society waiting to guide us once we're spiritually ready. It's Atlantis, but with better insulation. You wander through Telos in your imagination. Streets of glowing stone. Temples humming with vibrational energy. A population of serene beings who look like they walked off the cover of a fantasy novel. They don't seem worried about rent, climate change, or politics. And compared to the chaos above ground, it's hard not to feel jealous. The Hollow Earth version of Lemuria also ties neatly into UFO lore. Some believers claim the glowing orbs and strange lights seen around Shasta aren't aliens at all. They're Lemurians popping in and out of their subterranean homes. Which means, apparently, your local hiking trail could double as the entrance to a lost civilization. Of course, skeptics point out some flaws. For one, Earth is not hollow. For another, if an entire civilization of giant psychic beings lived under California, you'd think someone would have run into them by now, probably a confused park ranger. But logic has never been the strong suit of myths like this. What matters isn't geology. It's yearning. Standing at the base of Mt. Shasta, it's easy to see why the myth persists. The mountain looms like a cathedral, often crowned in strange cloud formations that look otherworldly. Its slopes are dotted with caves and springs, places that already feel sacred. Add in a dash of mysticism and some inventive storytelling, and suddenly you have a portal to Lemuria. You picture hikers crossing paths with robed figures glowing faintly in the twilight. You imagine tunnels lit by crystal energy. You wonder how many people actually believe, and how many just want to believe, because it's more fun than another brochure about geology. At the end of the day, the Hollow Earth Lemurians serve the same purpose as every other lost civilization myth. They offer comfort. The idea that someone wiser, older, more advanced is still out there, waiting to save us when we've made enough of a mess. A cosmic safety net. Or maybe just a bedtime story with really good production value. You step back into the sunlight. Mt. Shasta towers above, silent and massive. No glowing Lemurians emerge. No hidden tunnels open. Just rock, sky, and the faint sound of hikers complaining about blisters. But the myth lingers, heavier than the mountain itself. Because sometimes, The worlds we imagine underground feel more real than the one we have above. You wake up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which is awkward because there's no land in sight, just endless blue water stretching to the horizon. Waves slap against you, the sun beats down, and you start to wonder if this was a terrible vacation choice. And then you remember, according to some people, there used to be a whole continent here. They called it Mu. Mu is like Atlantis' cousin, the one nobody really invites to parties, but who still shows up with wild stories. The myth comes mainly from James Churchward, a British colonel who, in the early 20th century, claimed he had deciphered ancient tablets in India that revealed the existence of a vast Pacific continent. According to him, Mu was home to a highly advanced civilization that sank thousands of years ago, taking all its secrets with it. Congrats, you've washed up on a landmass that never existed. Churchward described Mu as stretching across the Pacific, home to millions of people, with cities, temples, and technology far ahead of its time. Its people, of course, were wise, noble, spiritually elevated, the usual myth package. When Mu sank, it supposedly scattered survivors across the globe, seeding civilizations in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Asia. In other words, Churchward's Mu was a one-stop origin story for everyone, everywhere. Convenient. The problem? There's no geological evidence. None. The Pacific Ocean is covered in tectonic plates that simply don't allow for a lost continent the size of Mu. Volcanic islands? Yes. Entire sunken landmasses? No. Geologists politely rolled their eyes at Churchward's claims, but his books sold anyway, because people love a good lost world. Facts be damned. Spoiler alert, if your theory explains every ancient civilization at once, it's probably wrong. Still, the myth of Mu stuck. It blended into theosophy, New Age beliefs, and pseudo-archaeology, becoming a kind of catch-all explanation for the mysterious. How did the pyramids get built? How did Easter Island statues appear? Why do cultures share similarities across oceans? Mu again. It's the ultimate cosmic shrug. You picture it, a lush, tropical continent dotted with temples glowing in the sun, people in flowing garments studying the stars, harnessing energies we've forgotten. And then a sudden cataclysm, earthquakes, volcanoes, waves, and Mu vanishes, leaving nothing but a story. It's cinematic, dramatic, and tragically unverifiable. What makes Mu interesting is how global it feels. Unlike Atlantis, which is firmly European in origin, Mu sits in the Pacific, touching cultures across Polynesia, Asia, and the Americas. That gave it a kind of exotic, universal appeal, especially to Western audiences who were fascinated with mystical East narratives. Churchward leaned heavily into that, dressing up his claims with vague references to ancient wisdom and lost scriptures. Standing on the deck of your imaginary raft, you squint at the horizon. No continent rises. Just waves, wind, and the occasional seagull that looks disappointed you don't have snacks. But the myth of Mu still floats, partly because it solves a problem. Humans crave origins. We want all the scattered puzzle pieces of history to fit neatly together. Mu was a giant box cover image, everything explained by one lost paradise. Step back into the real world. The Pacific is vast, dotted with islands that do have real histories, Polynesians who navigated by stars, cultures that thrived on tiny atolls, carving out lives against impossible odds. That's the actual miracle. No sunken supercontinent required. But Mu survives, not in geology, but in imagination. New Age books still sell it. Some even claim remnants of Mu lie under the sea near Japan or Easter Island. Crystal healers insist they channel Lemurian Mu wisdom. And conspiracy theorists, well, they're never going to let go of a continent that explains everything. The ocean waves keep rolling. The Pacific hides many things, wrecks, trenches, mysteries, but not Mu. Still, as you drift in the sun, you understand the appeal. Sometimes we don't want the truth. We want the lost paradise that makes us feel connected, special, chosen. Mu was never real. But the longing for it? That's unsinkable. You wake up on a lonely island in the middle of the Pacific. The wind howls across barren slopes, and the sea crashes endlessly against black volcanic cliffs. Scattered across the land are enormous stone faces, moai, half-buried, solemn, staring inland as if waiting for something that never came. Welcome to Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island. The statues are breathtaking. Some stand 30 feet tall, weighing more than 100 tons. Their heads are elongated, their expressions oddly calm. They look eternal, like they were placed here by giants, or by survivors of some lost civilization. At least, that's what the old myths of Mu would have you believe. Congrats, you're about to learn how real history got hijacked by fantasy. In the early 20th century, when James Churchward was busy selling books about Mu, Easter Island became Exhibit A. How else, he argued, could such small, isolated communities carve and move these colossal statues without advanced tools, without lost technology, without help from his imaginary Pacific continent? The answer was obvious. To him, at least, Easter Island was a surviving fragment of Mu, its people descendants of a vanished master race. Spoiler alert, the real story is both less glamorous and far more impressive. The Rapa Nui people, Polynesian navigators, arrived on the island around 1200 CE. They brought with them crops, chickens, and the seafaring traditions of their ancestors. Despite the island's isolation, they built a complex society centered on ancestor worship, which inspired the moai. These statues weren't cosmic Wi-Fi routers. They were embodiments of lineage and memory, meant to keep the presence of the ancestors alive. And they moved them, yes, moved them, using clever techniques. Experiments show moai can be walked upright with ropes, rocked gently forward like stone refrigerators. No lost continent required. Just ingenuity, teamwork, and maybe a lot of yelling. But of course, outsiders couldn't resist spinning myths. Europeans arriving in the 18th century couldn't believe Polynesians had done this on their own. Racist assumptions filled the gap. Surely someone else, some higher race, maybe Mu's refugees, had to be responsible. Because heaven forbid the actual islanders get credit. That's the irony. Fantasies of Mu explain away what's in front of us, replacing real human achievement with imaginary civilizations. It's easier to believe in mystical builders than to accept that people with stone tools, grit, and determination did the impossible. You walk among the moai. Their faces rise above the grass, quiet, weathered. Some lie toppled, victims of conflict or collapse. The island itself bears scars: deforestation, soil erosion, societal strain. For centuries, the people adapted, struggled, reshaped their world. Their story isn't one of alien wisdom or sunken continents. It's about resilience, survival, and the limits of an environment. Yet the myth of Mu still lingers here. Tourists buy books linking Easter Island to lost continents, UFOs, or hidden civilizations. New Age guides insist the statues are energy conductors, aligned with cosmic grids. The moai keep staring, patient as ever, while humans project endless fantasies onto their stone faces. Step back and the irony deepens. Rapa Nui doesn't need Mu to be fascinating. Its history, the voyaging across thousands of miles of open ocean, the creation of megaliths with stone tools, the cultural ingenuity of survival, is extraordinary on its own. But myths are seductive. Mu turns a local achievement into a global mystery, an easy story that feels grander than the truth. The wind picks up. Clouds race over the Pacific sky. You look at the moai again, their calm expressions unbothered by centuries of misinterpretation. They don't need rescuing from history. They stand as reminders that people, ordinary people, did this. And that's more miraculous than any lost continent. Because the real builders weren't from Mu. They were here, on this rock in the ocean, carving their ancestors into stone and daring the world to remember. You wake up on a rocky plateau in Anatolia. The air is dry, the sun harsh, and the ground under your feet is scattered with broken stones. In the distance, ruined walls rise, weathered and silent. This was once Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire. A city that ruled, conquered, negotiated, and then vanished so thoroughly that for centuries, historians thought it was a myth. That's right. The Hittites weren't just forgotten. They were erased, filed away as biblical footnotes until their ruins re-emerged in the 19th century. Imagine being a superpower and then getting downgraded to maybe fictional. Congrats, you're standing in the heart of a lost empire that controlled half the ancient Near East. At their peak, around 1600 to 1200 BCE, the Hittites commanded a sprawling kingdom across Anatolia and into Syria. They battled Egypt, raided Mesopotamia, and controlled key trade routes. They left behind treaties, laws, and the first recorded international peace agreement, the Treaty of Kadesh, signed with Pharaoh Ramses II. Not bad for a people later forgotten. They also mastered iron earlier than most. While neighbors still clung to bronze, the Hittites were experimenting with the harder, sharper stuff. The catch? It wasn't mass production yet, more elite weaponry than widespread technology. But the association stuck. The Hittites became known as the first iron wielders, the ones who set the stage for a new age of warfare. You wander through Hattusa's gates. Lion Gate, King's Gate, Sphinx Gate, massive stone entryways carved with creatures meant to awe and intimidate. Inside, palaces and temples once bustled with life. Scribes pressed cuneiform into clay tablets, archiving everything from treaties to recipes. Priests tended to storm gods, because if you live on the Anatolian plateau, weather is basically religion. And then, it all unraveled. Around 1200 BCE, the empire collapsed. The so-called Sea Peoples raided the Mediterranean. Climate shifts triggered famine. Internal strife weakened the state. One by one, cities fell, trade routes crumbled, and the empire dissolved into memory. By the time classical Greece was rising, the Hittites were already ghosts. Spoiler alert. If your entire civilization can be forgotten for 3,000 years, maybe humility is a good investment. What's striking is how total the disappearance was. Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, they all left enough traces to stay famous. But the Hittites? Silence. For centuries, scholars read about them in ancient texts and assumed they were just a literary invention. It wasn't until the 1800s, when ruins were excavated and thousands of tablets unearthed, that the Hittites walked back into history. Imagine the collective facepalm of archaeology. You sit on a fallen wall, the heat pressing down. It's quiet here. Birds circle above, insects hum. Hard to believe this was once a capital that challenged pharaohs. But that's the story of empires. They roar, then whisper, then fade. The irony? The Hittites might be one of the most relatable of the lost civilizations. They weren't mystical, they weren't superhuman. They were bureaucrats, warriors, deal-makers, people trying to run a messy empire in a messy world. They fought, they innovated, they signed treaties to avoid constant war. And when the storm of history came, they fell like everyone else. The stones of Hattusa don't glow with crystal energy. They don't hide secret Atlantean tech. They just sit here, weathering in the sun, quietly reminding you that even superpowers can vanish into rumor. You brush dust from your hands. The ground feels heavy with centuries, yet oddly empty. The Hittites are proof that being powerful doesn't guarantee being remembered. Sometimes, you can rule half the world and still end up as a historical afterthought. And that, perhaps, is the most humbling legacy of all. You wake up in a city older than almost any you've ever seen. The air smells faintly of baked earth. The streets are straight, suspiciously straight, lined with bricks so uniform they'd put modern contractors to shame. There are drains along the sides, wells in courtyards, and houses with bathrooms. Bathrooms, 3,000 years before Rome thought it was clever. Welcome to the Indus Valley civilization. This wasn't a minor village. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley sprawled across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, covering an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Its cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhalavira, were home to perhaps 1 million people. Imagine that, 1 million souls in carefully planned grids, centuries before Europe figured out how not to drown in its own waste. Congrats, you've just arrived in one of history's biggest civilizations that hardly anyone talks about. Walking through Mohenjo-daro, you'd hear the clatter of potters, the splash of water drawn from wells, the shuffle of carts pulled through narrow streets. No royal palaces loom above you, no pyramids pierce the sky. Power here was quieter, less about monuments, more about order. The streets run on right angles, the bricks follow standardized sizes, and the drains, carry wastewater away with enviable efficiency. Rome gets statues. The Indus Valley gets plumbing. And then there's the writing. Tiny seals carved with strange symbols. Animals, abstract marks, maybe words. To this day, no one has cracked it. It might be a script. It might be proto-writing. Whatever it is, it's stubbornly silent. Thousands of artifacts, and still no Rosetta Stone to unlock their voices. The Indus people stare at us across 4,000 years, saying nothing. Spoiler alert, archaeologists hate unsolved mysteries. And here's the strangest part. For all their size and sophistication, we know shockingly little about them. No evidence of giant armies. No kings shouting their names across history. No epic wars etched in stone. The Indus Valley seems to have run on something much duller, and maybe more impressive: cooperation. Organized urban life without egomaniac rulers leaving endless monuments. Imagine that. But by 1900 BCE, the cracks showed. Climate shifted. The great rivers changed course, drying up in some places, flooding in others. Trade with Mesopotamia faltered. Slowly, the great cities emptied. People drifted into smaller villages. The urban grid unraveled. Not with fire and conquest, but with a quiet fade. A civilization so large it could be forgotten, not destroyed, just dissolved. You stand at the edge of a ruined well. The bricks are hot in the sun. A city once buzzing with life is now dust and silence. It's eerie. Not because it's mystical, but because it feels so ordinary. People lived here, ate here, argued over noisy neighbors here. And then they left. Not with a bang, just with tired feet and changing weather. Later civilizations remembered nothing of them. When the ruins were rediscovered in the 1920s, the shock was real. How could something this vast have slipped through history's cracks? And yet it had. Forgotten not because it was unworthy, but because time, rivers, and human memory are merciless. The irony? People chase myths of Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria, while the Indus Valley, an actual civilization, bigger than all of them, sits ignored in dusty textbooks. No crystals, no UFOs, no glowing temples. Just order, drains, and quiet brilliance. You run your hand across a carved seal. The symbols mean nothing to you. Maybe they never will. The city whispers through its bricks and drains, but its voice remains locked. A civilization vast enough to rival Egypt and Mesopotamia, vanished in plain sight. Sometimes, the greatest mystery isn't the one you invent. It's the one you can't read. You wake up in a steaming jungle on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. The air is thick, damp, and buzzing with insects that immediately decide your lunch. The ground squelches beneath your feet, and then, you see it. Rising out of the earth is a massive stone head. Round face, flat nose, lips pressed in an expression that says, "I'm unimpressed." Welcome to the world of the Olmecs. The Olmecs flourished around 1200 to 400 BC, long before the Maya or Aztec ever carved their first pyramid. They're often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica because so many hallmarks of later civilizations, writing, calendars, ball games, monumental architecture, seem to start here. The colossal heads are their calling card, carved from basalt and weighing up to 50 tons. They stare out across the centuries, huge and heavy, with features so lifelike it feels like someone's still home. Congrats, you've just stumbled into one of history's greatest, who were they, and where did they go, puzzles. The Olmecs left behind no great written histories, only symbols we haven't fully cracked. Their cities, like San Lorenzo and La Venta, rose with complex layouts, ceremonial centers, and pyramid-like structures. They traded jade, obsidian, and rubber. Yes, actual rubber. They invented the ball game that would later echo across Mesoamerica, played with a solid rubber ball and more ritual than a modern sports league could handle. And yet, they vanished. By 400 BCE, the great Olmec centers were abandoned. The jungle crept back in, swallowing plazas and sculptures alike. The colossal heads alone resisted, stubbornly enduring in the mud. Archaeologists argue over the reasons: shifting rivers, exhausted soil, climate change, or maybe internal strife. Take your pick. Nature has a menu. Spoiler alert, civilizations don't usually end with alien abductions. Still, the Olmecs attract wild theories. Some claim the colossal heads prove contact with Africa, pointing to their features. Others fold them into Atlantis or Mu myths, insisting the Olmecs were survivors of lost continents. Because apparently it's easier to believe in imaginary continents than in indigenous genius. The truth is simpler. The Olmecs were brilliant, local, and human. No Atlantean passports required. You walk deeper into the jungle. The sound of cicadas fills the air. Another colossal head emerges, half buried, its surface scarred by centuries of rain. Each head is unique, likely portraits of rulers. Imagine your legacy being carved in 50 tons of stone, only to be forgotten for 2,000 years, rediscovered by a farmer clearing land. Humbling. And that's the real mystery, how something so massive could vanish from memory. Later civilizations borrowed from the Olmecs, but the name, the stories, the rulers themselves, gone. By the time the Spanish arrived, the Olmecs were a ghost, their culture absorbed into the soil and the myths of others. Standing before one of the heads, you feel the weight of silence. The Olmecs had cities, rituals, art, but history remembers them mostly for their sculptures. It's like compressing an entire civilization into a single emoji, Moai. And yet, maybe that's enough. The heads endure, watching over fields, forests, museums. They remind us that people long before Rome, before Greece, were carving their presence into stone, making sure they wouldn't be erased entirely. The jungle swallows almost everything, but not them. So, the Olmecs didn't leave us mystical technologies or continent-sized empires. They left us heads. Enormous, immovable, staring heads. Sometimes, survival in memory doesn't require words or myths. Just stone, patience, and a gaze that refuses to blink. You wake up on a hill in southeastern Turkey. The landscape is dry, dusty, almost barren, with sheep grazing in the distance and a hot wind sweeping across the plains. At first glance, it looks like nothing. A mound of dirt, a place you'd skip on a road trip. And then the earth opens up, and you see it, giant T-shaped pillars rising out of the ground, carved with animals, abstract symbols, and staring reliefs. This is Göbekli Tepe, a temple older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than almost everything. Congrats, you've stumbled onto the world's first forgotten temple, buried for 12,000 years. Dating back to around 9600 BCE, Göbekli Tepe turns history on its head. According to the neat timeline we like to believe, humans first farmed, then settled, and then built monuments. But here's a temple that existed before farming was widespread, built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly shouldn't have had the resources, time, or ambition to carve 20-foot megaliths. It's like finding out cavemen were secretly running an architecture firm. The pillars loom in circles, some etched with foxes, boars, vultures, snakes. They feel alive, as if the animals are frozen mid-movement, guarding the space. Some of the pillars even have stylized arms carved along their sides, suggesting they represent beings, half statue, half god, half something. Standing among them, you feel small, uninvited. Spoiler alert, this is not your cozy neighborhood shrine. The site forces a question. Did religion come before civilization? Maybe it wasn't farming that built society. Maybe it was belief, the urge to gather, to worship, to build something bigger than yourself. Göbekli Tepe hints that humans were willing to carve and lift stones weighing tons long before they planted wheat in neat rows. Faith, not food, might have been the first glue of civilization. And then the strangest twist, they buried it. Around 8000 BCE, after centuries of use, the builders deliberately filled in the site with rubble and sand. Carefully, almost lovingly. Imagine constructing the world's first monumental temple, then deciding, okay, pack it up, cover it with dirt. And so it slept, hidden under its own funeral mound, until a shepherd stumbled across carved stones in the 1990s. You stand at the edge of a circle of pillars, the sun scorching your neck. The silence is heavy, older than anything you've known. What rituals played out here? Sacrifices, feasts, ceremonies under the stars? We'll never know. The site gives us carvings but no script, monuments but no explanation. It's history's oldest riddle, a temple too early, too advanced, too mysterious. Naturally, the fringe theories swarm. Some insist Göbekli Tepe proves contact with aliens. Others fold it into Atlantis, arguing it's a remnant of the real, lost civilization, conveniently dropped in Anatolia. Because apparently hunter-gatherers with chisels are less believable than Martians with blueprints. But the reality is already miraculous. Nomadic groups, without wheels, metal, or beasts of burden, dragged stone pillars across the land and raised them into vast sanctuaries. No aliens. No Atlantean engineers. Just determination, cooperation, and imagination. You brush the dust from your hands. The site stretches out around you, circles within circles, each one older than recorded memory. This is where humans gathered not to survive, but to believe. And then they erased it as if to say, we came, we worshipped, and now we leave. The wind rises, whistling through the scaffolding that now protects the site. Göbekli Tepe doesn't whisper answers. It just stands, impossible and immovable, a reminder that the neat timeline of progress is a story we tell ourselves. Reality is stranger, earlier, and much less convenient. And in the end, maybe that's why it feels like a lost civilization, because even when we uncover it, it refuses to explain itself. You wake up in the present day, which is already disappointing because there are no colossal stone heads outside your window, no buried temples under your backyard, no glowing ruins to explore. Just bills on the counter and the faint hum of your fridge. The lost civilizations are still lost. But strangely, the idea of them never is. Atlantis. Lemuria. Places that probably never existed, and yet they refuse to die. We keep them alive in books, movies, conspiracies, and bedtime stories. Because the myths fill gaps in our history. And humans hate gaps. Congrats. You've just realized we might be less interested in the truth than in the stories that comfort us. Think about it. Real civilizations vanish quietly. The Indus Valley faded with shifting rivers. The Olmecs dissolved into the jungle. The Hittites collapsed under famine and invasion. These endings are slow, messy, and inconvenient. No fireballs. No continents sinking overnight. Just human fragility, stretched until it breaks. But myths? Myths are neat. One continent sinks. One cataclysm wipes it all away. One grand explanation ties everything together. We get drama, closure, and maybe a few mysterious survivors scattering their wisdom across the globe. It's history with a Hollywood script. Spoiler alert, we like our history clean even when it never was. Lost civilizations also give us something else, a sense of superiority. If there was once a golden age, Atlantis with its gleaming towers, Lemuria with its wise mystics, then maybe we are the heirs of that greatness. Maybe buried somewhere inside us is a spark of that lost genius. Or maybe we're just projecting, because it's easier to dream of being chosen than to admit we're winging it like everyone else. And then there's the romance of ruins. Standing in the shadow of a crumbling temple, you feel small, connected to something bigger. You imagine ancient voices, forgotten rituals, secrets carved into stone. The unknown hums louder than the known. A lost civilization is the ultimate blank canvas. We get to paint it however we want. But here's the twist. We already have lost civilizations. Real ones. Civilizations that built, thrived, and disappeared without fanfare. We just don't romanticize them enough, because their endings are too ordinary. Rivers dry up. Crops fail. Trade routes collapse. People move on. That's not mythic, it's just sad. You sit back in your chair. The myths swirl together. Atlantis under the waves, Mu in the Pacific, Lemuria stretching across oceans. None of them ever existed. And yet they feel more alive than the real Indus Valley or the real Hittites. Because imagination is louder than archaeology. And maybe that's the point. Myths aren't about truth. They're about longing. Longing for order, for lost wisdom, for a golden age where everything made sense. In a world that feels chaotic and fragile, the idea of a lost civilization offers a comforting story. We once had it all. We could again. The fridge hums. The bills still sit on the counter. You glance out the window one more time. No Atlantean ruins have risen overnight. Just the world as it is, noisy, flawed, endlessly human. But you understand now. We don't chase lost civilizations because they existed. We chase them because we wish they had. And that, ironically, is what keeps them alive.